Well, good afternoon, everybody. I am very excited for another episode of the Industrial Real Estate Show. And this episode is about automation and robotics. And I love everything to do with technology, but it's a bit of an ambivalence as sometimes I hate technology. And getting set for this episode was a perfect example of that. I couldn't get my microphone to connect to my computer, so I actually had to switch computers. So I was running a little bit late getting organized, which is one of the perils of technology. When it works for you, it works great. And when it doesn't, it presents challenges. The two guests that I have on this week's episode are experts, which can hopefully help us navigate through some of those challenges and prepare warehouse owners and companies that lease the space to be better prepared for robotics and automation. Two guests are Clayton and Lori from Hy-Tek Intralogistics, and we're going to jump into a number of different topics related to everything to do with automation and robotics inside of the warehouse. I think it's going to be a fascinating conversation, and I'd encourage you, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to put in the chat, and we'll get to as many as we can, or just even jump in to say hello. I always like hearing who's in here as well. So without any further ado, pleased to be joined by Lori and Clayton. Hi, guys. How are you both doing?
Good.
Great, Chad. How you doing?
Good to see you again. And we'd prepared a couple times for this, so I feel like we've got a lot to talk about. But before we do that, I'd love to just dive into a little bit more of your backgrounds and get a better understanding of your roles and what you're going to be sharing with us today. And perhaps, Lori, I could start with you and then move to Clayton after.
Sure. So I am the director of consulting here at Hy-Tek Intralogistics. I've been in this role for about 2 or 3 years. Prior to that, I was just a consultant with Hy-Tek. So I've been here. We were previously Johnson Stevens Consulting, been rolled into Hy-Tek about 3 years ago. And so been in the consulting field for quite a bit of time. So basically, consulting with supply chain, mostly in distribution center design, what goes in your distribution center, how big it should be, what type of technologies do you need to have, how can you make your space more efficient, whether that's with labor or technology and just those kind of things. I have a background in industrial engineering from Georgia Tech, and Clayton and I have one thing in common. We both probably started off as industrial engineers at Neiman Marcus in Dallas. So that's an interesting kind of connection between us two, but that's a little bit high level of my background.
Oh, thanks for sharing. And Clayton?
Yeah, so I've not been in the consulting role as long as Lori has. I've been doing the consulting thing for about 2 years. But before that, I was kind of on the other side of things, as Lori said. So I've been in direct to consumer retail. I've been in small parcel shipping. I've been in distribution. So I've used the warehouse for multiple different ways, different businesses, and been in the shoes of, where most of our clients are now, looking for technology, trying to make sure what we figure out fits our operation. So been an operator and an IE for quite a while, and now more in a consulting role.
It's great to have you both on here to share your insights and your expertise going with that, because I think that there is a big appetite for people to get a better understanding of technology that's available to them. And it's funny. On one hand, a lot of people think of industrial real estate as just four walls and a roof, but it's a massive industry. There's a study put out a couple of years ago by Nareit and CoStar, which said that there's about 20 billion square feet worth of industrial real estate in the US alone, and the aggregate value is over $2 trillion. So you have this massive industry that people think is really simple, when in reality, there's a lot of technology available right now to companies that want to become more efficient. So maybe we could even start there. Let's say it's a company that has a warehouse, and perhaps it is that four walls and the roof. Maybe they just have an old racking system in there, and they do things the old way of using a pallet jack or a forklift to move things around. If that company were to say that they wanted to increase their technology, what options would be available to them? And I know that that's a loaded question, so perhaps we'd even just start with the most easy things that they can do, and then we can ladder in some more advanced things. What that old school company that's been doing things the same way forever, what are some of the first things that you'd recommend to them to become more efficient?
Yeah, I guess I'll jump in on this one. And I think, the first thing is looking at your operations. you know, a lot of people, believe it or not, in this day and age are still using paper picking methods. So you get your pick list on a piece of paper and you go out and you find where it is and you go do that. So bringing that up, using scanners, it can be handheld scanners. They have a lot of interesting devices now, like gloves and ring scanners, so that you're more hands free, which means, especially depending on what type of picking you're doing, if you're picking heavy cases, you have the ability to keep your hands free, so you can still do that using the scanner. So getting rid of that paper pick is one of the first things. You can also, which another good thing, especially for some of these to keep hands free, are voice systems. So you have headphones. The headphones direct you, tell you where your next pick is in the warehouse. You go there, you validate that you're picking the right carton or piece of or whatever you're picking, and then you go to the next one. So it's just a way to direct you, keep your hands free, keep you moving through, keeping you more productive, right? So that as you picked, you're already getting information where to go next, and you can kind of keep moving. And then another thing is using light systems. You can use lights that pick to light or put to light systems that help to direct you. It's very a visual system. You don't get into people, if you've got many different languages or different dialects being spoken in your warehouse, makes it a little bit easier too. So there are a lot of systems like that really, that's generally a good starting off place, you know, to kind of start getting, it's not what you'd call really automation, but getting more technology in your warehouse to kind of jump into it. I don't know, Clayton, if you want to add anything into that.
Yeah, I mean, even from a higher level, kind of where you were going with that, Chad, is where's your bottleneck, right? Where is your opportunity to improve? Do you have throughput issues, or do you have labor concerns? And then you can start to back that into maybe where that technology needs to fit, right? So as a if you're still running an old school operation, that might be where you start. Is you don't do everything at once. You go with different parts of your operation and you retrofit those into something more technology friendly.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And I think that coming back to the original question that I had for you is I doubt many companies would go 0 to 60 where they were that old school company and now they're have full automation and full robotics. They probably do want to take those steps, but I'm guessing that at the backbone of a lot of this would be some software systems, whether they are going paperless or whether they're going to the light to pick systems. There's probably a technology or software platform. Does that scale as they add more things on, or is that something that you almost, and I guess what I'd be trying to get to here is how elaborate does the software system get in some of these more elaborate warehouse systems?
Well, seeing as we were only planning an hour, we'll keep that to a how deep do you want to go down the rabbit hole kind of thing. But you know, one of the things that you can get lost in is the W's. You know, one of our VPs indicates like, hey, there's more W's out there. There's warehouse management, there's warehouse execution. It's just WWW. Like there's all kinds of different software levels there. Now, my suggestion would be you potentially need something, right? You need to level in something on that front. And usually where you start is with something like a WMS, which is warehouse management system. And that's about managing the inventory, right? Then as you get into your technology, then you get into more of the execution side of the software, something that's going to move your robots or direct your lights to turn on and off and that kind of thing. And with any software that you choose, they're going to scale. So you can start off with one set of lights and move to 100, and that software can scale. Or you can add, you know, to your point, maybe I was doing something in my receiving department. Now I want to do something in picking. As long as you have that platform in place, you can start to be more modular with it. Like you can, you know, with any other software that you might purchase, you can add modules and pieces to it to build there. And, you know, what you really want to look for is something that has kind of that all in one, right? Where it's something that offers, you know, kind of every little thing that you might be looking for along with that scale. So trying to get the best bang for your buck.
Speaking of bang for buck, and I'm first point question that I'd have is there economies of scale where a company that has a 1 million square foot warehouse will be able to get perhaps on a per square foot basis a lot cheaper than a company that is 100,000 square feet. Is there that economy of scale where smaller operations just going to have to spend more, perhaps per employee or per dollar of inventory? Or how does that number scale over a bigger warehouse?
And if are you referring to the software portion of it?
Yeah, I guess I'd like to actually talk about all of that, because I think for anyone listening, they'd want to have an idea of what all these costs are. So perhaps on the software side, because if that's the foundation for what everything is going to be built on, perhaps that's the best place to start.
Yeah, and I think it's really important, if you're not sure what you need, to kind of look at your operations. There are different tiers of WMS too that have different functionality, and sometimes, if you're paying tier one is kind of the ultimate top range of WMS. So if you're looking at it, maybe you don't really need a tier one, maybe you need a tier two, and the prices are very different between those two. So I think it's good if, to kind of get some help and see what you're really looking for and what you really need in a WMS. And then also potentially look at where you're going, look forward and making sure, like to Clayton's point, you have that scalability. Maybe you don't need all that functionality today. Maybe you'll need it 5 years from now. Maybe you won't. So I think it's good to kind of sit back, pick your WMS. And that, like Clayton said, that's not our expertise. We know some about it, but that could be a whole nother conversation that we could get in, is how you do that. But, they're going to be a set cost to probably do that. So you're right. If you have, a big facility, maybe you need maybe you need a tier one, which is a little more expensive, but you're probably going to pay the same base cost for a WMS to get the same functionality depending on the size. And, there's some DCs that are, a lot of square foot, but maybe they're only, to go back to cost, maybe they're mostly racking and storage, like a lot of reserve storage, but not a lot of automation. So you can have a smaller square foot distribution center or fulfillment center with a lot of automation in there that's much more expensive than maybe a distribution center that's just a lot of reserve and racking that doesn't need that automation, right?
Yeah, well said. And I guess part of the case study is what you would be doing as consultants is evaluating what all these upfront costs are, and then determining what the cost saving and efficiency or productivity will be over time. If we could go even back to that one point that you made about the pick to light, if you could elaborate just on that a little bit more. I think I've got a pretty good understanding of the going from paper to paperless and what's involved there. But on the pick to light, what's that technology? What does that entail? What does that look like?
Yeah, and there are a lot of different ways this can be. So you could have it. One thing that we talk about is a pick module. So if you're picking a lot of times units, you could have an order that could come down. You scan a carton that is set for that order, and then there could be a row of lights. So if you think about it, rows of product on shelving with a little strip of lights below it, and each shelf and each little location has its own separate unit. So when you scan that carton, anything that you need to put in it could light up. That's a pick, that's a pick from light. So you would it'd say how many numbers. It'd light up and have a number, and it would associate that. So you'd go and then you hit that you've taken those numbers. So it kind of directs you to the right location. Another place this is really used is in store fulfillment. So if you say that you have 500 stores and you get a carton full of 20 units and they're going to all different stores, this would be directed down a lane. You would scan the carton, and the lights for the stores that need those units would light up and tell you which ones to go put it in. Now, this has got some automation and some conveyor systems that are connecting you from different areas, but you can use lights. You can have pick to light on carts where you go through and it tells you, it directs you to a certain location. And when you get there, it tells you which location in a cart that you need to put the item.
What I really like about that system, and you touched on it, that anybody with language barriers can work around that quite easy, but I'm guessing it also reduces the margin of error for somebody going and picking the wrong item or picking too much of the item. So I think that's a really interesting system, and perhaps that's a natural springboard to get into the more of the robotics and automation that we're seeing right now. And you touched on conveyor systems, so perhaps that's a good place to go into, is on the conveyor systems. What are you seeing right now on what's available, and perhaps even a two-part question. What do you think is coming down the road in conveyor systems right now?
Yes. So for conveyors, I think, they've changed a lot. I think they're becoming a little bit more modular. So they've got more smaller belt sections that kind of help move the conveyor along instead of maybe some of the more motor driven and rollers that you see. Um, conveyors, they're typically used like to move product from one place to another across the distribution center or the fulfillment center, but they can also be used for a lot of different sortation types. So you have you have conveyors that are sortation devices that can sort units, so that you put individual units and that can sort them either to different orders. So you can batch pick orders, pick all the units that maybe go to several different orders, and then they're sorted down a lane. Or it's also used to sort cartons that can go to different stores, cartons that need to go to different areas in your distribution center if they all come in, and some need different processing or some need to go different ways. So there are a lot of ways to use sorters and conveyors to move product and get it to where it needs to be. But one thing about them is they are fixed systems for the most part. So once you put a conveyor in, it's set, it moves it from one place specifically to another. And you can have different, like we said, different sortation methods, but you do have to plan around that and make sure that you're planning, because it can create barriers. So you have to have platforms sometimes to elevate so that you have walking spaces, so you don't cut up your distribution center and make, barriers that it's hard to move product through or people through too.
I know Amazon is using more robotics now, perhaps instead of using conveyor systems, or perhaps in conjunction with conveyor systems. So they'll have these robots, which are basically just little 1-foot robots running around all over the place, taking pallets, moving them where they're supposed to go. Is it just Amazon experimenting with that now, or are you seeing more of these robotics moving around the warehouse like a flurry of activity?
Yeah, I would say that's also what's coming next. When you say like what's coming after conveyors, what's big now is what we call AMRs, or autonomous mobile robots. Think of like what you were describing. It's like a Roomba, right? Like, or your vacuum at your house on steroids, right? And so we've got potential to move up to a pallet, right? They've got very large ones, like Otto or Mirror, that can move an entire pallet's worth of goods around the facility. Or you have smaller ones like a Tompkins T-sort that actually do the sortation instead of the conveyor system, right? Or you can use them in goods to person, right? Where you've either got a robot like with Exotech that it scurries off into the rack, brings back the goods to the person for picking. Or you potentially can bring the whole shelf. Like the larger ones can bring, instead of a pallet, they bring a shelf worth of goods, right? That's probably what you've seen with Amazon. So that's where, when Lori's talking about kind of the rigidity of conveyor systems, that's where robots are coming in and making things more flexible, and that less of a installment of the rigidity of the conveyor systems. So that's what we're really seeing next with robots.
So how are these run? Are they all run off that software program where it's the same way that if an order was to be picked, just instead of directing a person to go and do it, the robots just deployed to do it?
Yeah, and in a lot of these ways, these robots are another subsystem that plugs into the software, right? So it's kind of like another module, right? So the robots are kind of running on their own internal platform that's communicating back and forth with that oversight platform, right? So that WES type system. So your orders come in from your ERP system, they come down into that execution layer, and then that execution layer works back and forth with the robot hive. It sounds like Terminator or something, like they're ready to take over, but it's communicating back and forth with them. They're grabbing goods or taking goods away, and they're interacting on each layer like that.
When you start looking out further down the road on this, do you see this technology becoming more prevalent beyond the large companies and even a smaller distribution center having this type of technology? Or do you think that there's still a solid case study to be made that a well-trained workforce is there? And I guess the question that I would have is, at what point does technology start displacing more people than the jobs that it creates?
Yeah, and I think I'm sorry, and I think a lot of reason that people are going into robotics and looking at some of these technologies is because right now labor is so hard to find, and the cost of labor has gone up. So in the past, where maybe some of these automations for smaller companies wouldn't justify, it was way too expensive than what the savings would be. But that's come more in line now. And like we see, there what we call, there's a wide range, as Clayton was referring to, just a wide range of different types of robotics that are used for all different things. We're talking about, and it depends on what you're doing in the warehouse. One thing that we've seen and actually really been able to start implementing and recommending for some smaller companies are what we call cobots. So if you think of think of a large warehouse and you've got a lot of different products that you have to pick, and it's over a wide range of space. These can go into, so you can have a person stay in a specific zone. The robot stands at the end, kind of a meeting place. The person goes in and they scan into the robot. So they give their ID, and then the robot goes to where they need to pick. So they just follow along behind the robot. They pick up the items, follow around and put them in. And when they're done with all the picks have been made in their zone, then the robot can either go and deliver the items to the packing stations where they're packed and then sent to the customer, or go to another zone where another person is staying. And what this does is they're working alongside the people, but they're reducing a lot of the walking time. So if you think about, we have an area that's pretty far removed from where the packing area is, and this person is spending a lot of time walking around when they could be, if they can stay in their zone, they can get more picking done. It's less fatigue on the person because they're doing less walking. And a lot of these do have the lights on the robot that actually indicate when you scan in and pick where the item needs to go. So that also does help with your accuracy. And then the item goes to be picked. So these are not, and the robots aren't that expensive. They're fairly expensive, but like they said, they have the software kind of keyed in that you can plug into the WMS and it gets all the information. So these are really things that we're seeing that you can justify. And some of the companies even have, if you have a big peak, say maybe that you're an apparel or a retail company that has your big, Black Friday, your fall peak, some of them allow you to rent the robots. So if you have the base system, maybe during peak, they'll allow you to rent a couple of robots so you don't have to invest all that capital and have them for their entire year. So this is one way that we're seeing that they're really becoming more available.
Fascinating. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And I think that there's added benefits too. The robots don't call in sick, and they don't need vacation time, and they don't need to take breaks. They just work. And if you can scale those robots during peak times, that seems to make a lot of sense to me. So I think that covers the horizontal element of the warehouse of getting things from where they are. But there's also a lot of vertical technology for vertical applications for the racking now. And I think the acronym is ASRS. Is it Automated Storage Retrieval Systems? Is that what that stands for? So can you describe, because I mean, the way that most people are probably familiar with it is you have a forklift, but there's a lot more technology that's come there. If you can jump into that point as well.
Yeah, I think you get a gold star for catching on to jargon that quickly. I'm impressed. So, yeah, so I mean, I think when we were kind of talking before was, a building's not two-dimensional, right? It's three-dimensional. And so I think a lot of people forget that it's a cube, not a square. And so go up, leverage the space above the floor. And when it comes to these different type of technologies, the ASRS really is kind of a cube. And I kind of go back to that hive kind of concept, right? Is you've got storage that you can leverage that does kind of look like, think of it like a beehive or an ant colony, right? And you can build upwards to gain more storage capacity. And you use the different robots to travel in and out of that hive, picking product and bringing it to the user. From a larger standpoint, right? So, not everybody's on the individual goods fulfillment type, right? We've got very narrow aisle racking, right? So you put your racks very closely together and you use turret trucks, which are, very specialized forklifts, and they're wire guided. So there's, a wire embedded into the floor. And so you can guide the truck back and forth along that so they don't run into the rack to get really high up in the air with a very narrow space to travel, right? so those are just some of the different ways to go higher. And I mean, you can even be very simple, right? You can, Lori mentioned earlier, like a module, right? So build mezzanines, build rack supported modules where you can pick on floor 2 and floor 3 without having to worry about spreading out, right? So just go vertical.
So I think this is a natural point to look at the building itself, because you're consulting for clients that want to increase productivity and efficiency and maximize their cubic footage as opposed to the square footage, but you're confined to any restrictions within the warehouse. So I'm assuming if you're dealing with a modern building and it has 36-foot ceiling heights and there's a great loading area and everything with that building is conducive to incorporating this new technology, you don't have the issues. But what happens with companies that are in an older building? How do you look at the building, and perhaps it's the envelope, perhaps it's the column grid, the ceiling height? How do you look at those older buildings and evaluate what's possible?
Yeah, so I mean, Lori, I'll kick it over to you, but I mean, we reference those as a green field with a new building and a brown field with an older building, right? So you've got a couple different options there that you have to look at. You've got to consider things like the clearance height. When we were talking about modules, you got to remember things like, okay, this is my height. I can only go so high. I have sprinkler clearance. I have lighting clearance. I have fans. And then when you get down into that detailed design, you do have to look at things like the column grid of the building. I need to bury my columns within the rack and not put them in the middle of an aisle, right? Mm-hmm. So I prefer to lose a series of locations to store to versus putting a column right in the middle of a forklift path.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree. I think it does present some challenges. Usually, like you said, you don't have as high of ceiling clearance, but I think, you still can look at ways. Maybe you can't go up 3 levels high of a pick module, but maybe you can do 2. But I think it is good. And if you start, one way, with some of the conveyors, we look at, I think it's good to keep in mind too, what your ceiling loads are. We've gone in some older buildings. I think Clayton and I have both talked about this and been shocked at some things that they're hanging from the ceiling, but you need to make sure that you have the load and make sure before you do that you have some structural engineers that come in and make sure that your ceiling can bear anything that you put up there. Because it does, like we said, conveyors can add that barrier. But I think that's why it's being creative with the space that you have and looking how you can put those things in there, but maximize the space. Maybe there's some things over the dock doors that you can do. Maybe if you've got conveyor in the middle, can you put some kind of storage space over the middle of the conveyor if it's on the floor? We've seen some people with shipping docks that the conveyor comes down, but they actually put some racking around those conveyors that come into the shipping. So kind of trying to be creative with the space and looking at what you can and can't do, depending on what your needs are, right? So like Clayton, it goes back to what Clayton said. I think looking at any kind of technology or any kind of space, really understanding where your bottlenecks are, and then where you're spending a lot of money on people, or, where you're not getting value add, right? Where are the processes that you're doing that you're not really adding value to what you're doing? Those kind of things. And can you do some things to take away that labor, and what can you do in those spaces, and just trying to be, creative with what you got. You also have to look at some of the spaces if you're putting in any kind of ASRS, and kind of talked about this. There's some floor requirements on certain things, even on mezzanine. So making sure if you've got an older building that you're looking into what your floor can and can't support, and some of it's the flatness, even what Clayton was talking about with going up a very narrow aisle. If you go up really high, you do have to have some degree, because you've got those forks on there, and as you get higher, it gets a little bit more unstable. Making sure you have those requirements and that you've considered those things.
Yeah, great points. Where does the building's electrical power factor into all of this? And I'm assuming that a lot of the battery powered things, it's not a huge draw on power, but once you start getting into more of the robotics they're going to be heavier power requirements, is that something that you would bring in an electrical engineer to determine if the power is adequate? Or have you found that with today's current technology and robotics that hasn't been a concern?
I mean, I know we just worked on a building. It was a retrofit of a building. So it was an older building and it had some systems on there. Um, but I think especially when if you're talking about some of the conveyor systems and the sortation systems, you do need to make sure that you need to look at the power requirements from the building. And then, whoever's doing your implementation or integration, like we typically do when we do this, we know what the power draw is going to be, how many panels we're going to need based on the design of once you get into that. So we'd communicate back, or whoever your integrator should, or whoever's doing the installation should communicate back what those power requirements and what those draws are going to be. And then you'd need to get some type of electrician to come in and evaluate what your power that you do have in the building is, and if it's enough to satisfy all that, to get all those draws in there. And like we said, if it's a brownfield, it's a little bit more difficult. If you're doing a greenfield and you're doing this planning, the earlier you can get these kind of information done and where these panels are going to be and kind of get that into layout so that you can do the electrical drops prior as you're doing the building layout and as you're doing the building, and you know where all these things need to go. There's a lot of other things to think about, but that's really important too. It's going to save you money in the long run if you can plan ahead and get the right power to the right place while you're in the construction phase.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. So taking all that into account, where do you see warehouse space going in the next few years? Are a lot more companies going to adopt these types of technologies in robotics and automation? And what does the future of the warehouse look like in your mind?
That's an interesting question. Like and I'm sure your viewers and even you have some thoughts on this too, is like, when you say where it's going, my first thought is I keep seeing them pop up in the middle of cornfields, like literally like where there used to be a farm or something to that degree is now a distribution center or a warehouse of some kind. Even not too far from my house, I've seen them popping up, and they're a lot closer to the highway, right? So there's some interesting things happening on the transportation side of things that are forcing where warehouses are going, because as a little bit off to the subject is if we get more automated trucking, you're going to really put your warehouses closer to exits and closer to highway opportunities when it comes to fulfillment or distribution. But when you get actually within the four walls, it's back to what Lori was saying earlier, is about the labor, right? We also want to put a warehouse close to a strong labor force, but without paying out the nose for in those labor rates. So there's a lot of different networking optimization things to look at. Within the four walls, it's then about, can we reduce that head count where applicable, right? And then it's about right sizing everything. I think you were kind of alluding to this earlier when we were talking about tiered levels of things. Is there's going to be certain technologies that just they fit, and you've got the right volumes for them. If you're maybe a smaller mid-tiered operation, it doesn't make sense to put in multi-million-dollar robots and conveyor. It may just be about optimizing the space that you have and the processes that you have. I mean, it's hard to ever argue against just good old fashioned, value engineering, right? Do we do steps and non-value pieces to the process that we do? Can we eliminate those through process improvement, through software, and then even in technology, right? So, I'm not answering your question directly, but it's kind of there's a kind of a smattering of different things that it could go. And, Lori, you want to talk about maybe like where lights out kind of facilities are headed?
Yeah. Thanks, Clayton. I was gonna mention that. So, I don't know if you've heard that term, or that's the one that's distribution center of the future is kind of been going around the last couple of years, and lights out. And basically what a lights out facility, I don't know that maybe some companies will get there. To Clayton's point, I don't know financially that it makes sense, but that's the big discussion. And a lights out facility means you don't need to have any lights because you don't have any people working inside. So, if you go to any of there's a lot of different trade shows and you can see some amazing robotics and things. They have robotic arms that will go into a trailer and unload cartons onto a conveyor. We have a lot of you're talking about the driverless trucks. There are a lot of driverless fork trucks that are actually, some people are starting to implement. I was reading just a recent article now when they're going to be able to really let them go, because right now they're not as efficient as people. But if you can get cartons out and put them on a conveyor, have conveyor systems that direct them where they need to go. You have box cutters where they can take the box off the carton and decant them into a tote and put those into some type of an ASRS, like an Exotech or an Autobotics, and one of those type of things. And then you have it when it needs, it comes out, robotic arm picks it out, puts it in the right carton. We've got all kinds of things. And then, where you can have a carton sealer and it puts it in, tapes it up. And then you've got palletizers or direct that can, or robotic arms that can load a trailer. So that's the kind of thing that they're talking about, where you can have from everything inducted in, no people. It's all directed by computers and robotic arms. And that, is that the way it's going? Will that be there? Not quite sure that it's ever going to get to that degree or that it's financially going to make sense, but there are pieces and parts of that can be done. And especially the things, we've talked about, one client that we're dealing with is they're loading they get a lot of totes that they have to move from one distribution center to the next, and they're heavy. And loading these totes for a person to put these on a pallet and load them to a truck is difficult. It's hard work. It's heavy. There's a lot of injuries. If you can have a robot do those things and take off some of the pressure where the people don't have to do the things that are really some of the higher work that are more prone to injuries, that's a great save for a lot of different reasons. You can use those people to do other jobs. There's so much turnover. People are having a hard time finding people. And then you can get maybe some better productivity. So those are some of the ways that maybe things are going. There are a lot of those applications out there. And I think, like to Clayton's point, I think making sure that you're picking the right ones for your company. Run, crawl, don't walk, crawl, walk, run. Start off slowly with the things and kind of integrate, maybe try something, one or two pieces, and make sure that it works. But there are a lot of things that are out there that we're looking at that are really cool that, are pieces of that.
Yeah. I want to add one piece to that too, Jack, because there's a couple other things out there that are neat or cool, right? Like we've seen drones running through the warehouse, like you would maybe take photographs of real estate with, that are checking inventory levels within the pallet rack, right? Or there was even an interesting article in the Wall Street Journal this morning. Lori and I were talking about earlier today about some packaging opportunities, right? Where it builds a box on demand and kind of you put in a skillet or a microwave or a basketball and out comes a box, right? So it's kind of product in, carton out kind of stuff. So there is a lot of things out there that can fit and you can go completely lights out. But to Lori's point, don't let cool and fun and neat take over good business sense, right? You don't want to get caught up in the trade show or something that you see on YouTube and not still apply, some good business sense to it and see what actually fits. Because, back to your question earlier about, our robots and automation replacing people. And I don't think so. It's more of a support, because we always need good people to take care of things like the exceptions in the warehouse. And I would prefer my people focusing on the exception or the problem versus the redundant task, kind of like what Lori was getting at.
Or the task that involves lifting something beyond their capacity and perhaps getting an injury. Yeah, that's so very well said by both of you. I was loving everything that you said on that. And it just struck me that is the full spectrum there. There still is that old school warehouse, which will probably continue doing the things, all the way to some of these companies that are looking to the future. And That lights out one, that's scary to think that there could just be this building in the middle of nowhere that's doing all of this by automation. And then you add in perhaps driverless trucks coming at some point down the road. So you have this network of vehicles coming in and everything's automated. Then we do start looking at some kind of Skynet from Terminator with the AI, because that's kind of a scary thought. That leads to the next question that I had is, do companies need to future proof for some of these things? And perhaps they are cool and they're fads right now. And I agree with you. It's the best business practices to do things that actually work as opposed to things that are cool. But if these vehicles do come, if we do have driverless semi trucks in the next 10 years, or we start seeing a proliferation of drone deliveries, perhaps even outside of the building as opposed to doing inventory scans, perhaps it's actually drone deliveries. Do companies need to be cognizant of these coming down the road, or is it more wait and see and adapt if necessary?
I mean, go ahead, Lori.
No, you go ahead.
I was going to say a little bit of both, really. Like, I mean, I've done projects in the past where maybe the business plan is saying we need to grow this much, right? We need to grow by X. Well, the financial support of X is pretty heavy lift, right? Or we don't really know where this is going in the future. So maybe we build out to a certain point and then we leave, if we kind of keep it in the real estate concept, right? We buy enough land, right? And we leave opportunity to build building on top of it, right? Mm-hmm. So let's build a building, if it's a new building that is X amount of square feet with reasonable opportunity to expand directly off of that building, right? So if you have cooler freezer operation, for example, you need to make sure that cooler or freezer is maybe actually touching an outside wall, so that if you expand that, you're pouring new concrete for that type of operation versus trying to retrofit something within the existing space. So yes, plan for it, but there's also some level of adaptation too, right? Because to your point, we don't know where we're going exactly. So there's a happy medium in between, is at least what I would say. Lori, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's always good to kind of be looking forward to what's coming and how that's going to interact and how your systems are going to have to interact with what's coming down the pipe, especially with other companies. And, have until it gets, be ready and be thinking and keep your eyes open to what's coming down the path. And I think exactly what Clayton said, having a plan in place, whatever that may be. We come into a lot of companies and the first thing we do is, if we're looking out, we want to leak out at least 5 years. So I think having a kind of a plan over what do you think you're going to need? What's coming down the path, and what is this going to mean for my systems? What is this going to mean for my operations? How do I need to connect in with those systems? How does my growth need to change? What does that look like? Because maybe there's some things that don't work for you right now, but if you get to a certain place in 5 years, they will. And what is that? Do we need to revisit this in 2 years and kind of keep looking? So I think it's all of those things, just kind of making sure. I think we always have to kind of keep looking and be aware of what that is and how that's going to affect our operations and what we do.
Yeah, great points. I see a couple questions came in from Neil. Wyatt, if you don't mind pulling those up. And thanks, Neil, for joining in the question. And if anyone else has any questions, please feel free to put those in the chat as well. Neil asks, is it difficult to convince building owners that new tech can save cash, or is it an easy sale? As consultants, this is probably a question you get asked all the time.
Yeah, I think it varies from client to client. And I think that's why if you do something like this is one thing is really, if you do this, it's a great question. It's really good to build a good business case, to understand what you have and to really look, okay, what is this technology that we're going to do going to save me? Is it going to save me labor? What does that mean? How much labor over a year? How much labor over the next 5 years? Is it going to save me space? How does that space translate into maybe I don't have to expand our operation if it saves space, or maybe I can get more out of this. I can stay in this building for an extra 3 or 4 years. So you compare that space save and your labor space versus the capital investments that required. and just analyze what that internal rate of return is or that payback period is. Most companies have some kind of a threshold that they like to see. And so it's building that business case and making sure that you understand and being cognizant, like, Clayton's mentioned, with your IT systems is when you're looking at the cost involved, not just the cost of that just one piece, but, being aware that it may have some internal costs that you're going to have to incur. Are you going to have to, have some people, do you have internal resources that'll support whatever systems integration? Maybe it's not that big of a deal, but making sure you're just aware and taking into account all of those costs and then evaluating quickly. And if it's got a payback, if it's a 2-year payback, then it's going to be an easy sell, or if it's a 1-year payback, you're going to say, look, we can save this much money. That's an easy sell. So it depends.
Yeah, it's not as much fun as just saying it's always easy. But Lori couldn't be spot on. It just kind of depends on the client or the building owner or the operation, because there's some qualitative things to go along with the quantitative business case too, right? Like Lori was getting at, is the IT lift. We're just not ready for that kind of technology jump, right? We've been doing things, and I think you kind of even got to this earlier too, Chad, is we've been doing this a certain way for 25 years. We're not ready to go to a lights out building, right? Or, we have a workforce that is not as familiar with these type of technologies. Can we ease them into it? Those kinds of things. So there's different ways, as Lori said, on that business case to not only have your numbers in line, but understand your qualitative scoring too. What's important to you is are you in a situation where getting staffing, it's not about really saving the money on labor? I can't find people in this area anymore because, Amazon or somebody else has moved in. We've got to find ways to supplement this. Or, I really want to make sure my people, I'm taking care of my folks. I want to put in a technology that, like pick-to-light, that works well with them or supports some of those ergonomic things that we were talking about earlier. So you may have a qualitative scoring system that supplements your business case as well.
Great point. And I can see that. I can see a company saying, we've done it for 25 years this way. There's no reason for us to change right now. And perhaps they're not taking into account the fast pace of technology adoption within their competitors. Perhaps that hasn't kicked in quite yet. So they're probably just saying this, we've done it this way for so long, or perhaps they have like you mentioned, an aging workforce that doesn't want to learn new systems. My wife is learning a new system at their hospital, and it's a whole new change for everybody there, and they're overwhelmed and probably stressed out to some extent just by having to learn a new system. So I can appreciate how a lot of companies out there would take the same approach, saying this seems overwhelming, we're going to stress out our workers with this, and we're still profitable, we're still making money, so why change it? But I think when you compare yourself to what your competitors are doing, if they're adopting these systems and they can become more productive and more efficient, then you're going to start losing market share just by sticking to those old school methods. So I think that kind of leads into what I wanted to get your insights onto, and just in the consulting process in itself. And I'm guessing there's different stages here depending on what someone's looking for. If they're just looking to go paperless, that's probably a lot easier than doing a full lights out. Perhaps is too far down the road right now, but something similar to that. What is your job as you're consulting? Like, when are you brought in? What does that process look like? What are the timelines involved in that?
So different companies bring us in at different times. So the earlier the better. We do a lot of different projects. We do everything from what we call a process optimization, which is where we go in and just look at the basic processes. What can you do? What's that low hanging fruit, what we kind of call it, those different things. And maybe those are very low tech. Maybe it's just gravity conveyor, maybe it's adding in some different processes, taking out those kind of things, to where we do distribution capacity optimizations, where we're coming in and looking at how can you get the most out of the building you have? How can you increase that? What kind of technologies do you come in? So usually it's getting to a point when people, a lot of times in the past, it's been when they've been getting, to the capacity of their current facility and looking, what do we do next? Can we stay here? Do we expand? How do we look at this? But sometimes, lately, because it's that we're not having the people, we need to get more throughput. So we're brought in a lot of different places, but we kind of look at the operation as a whole and what technologies and what processes work best. Sometimes we're brought in, they're building a brand new distribution center, and it's a lot easier when you're bringing in to a green space, greenfield location rather than a brownfield. Because if you've already got some operations, like you said, in some places and some kind of operations, it's harder to make some of the higher technologies have enough productivity improvement to justify putting them in. But you can get those in greenfield a little bit more easy. So greenfield is if you're planning a distribution center as early as you can, just so that we can work or whoever you work with can really get in there, get all the information, and like we said, build it out. And then if you're doing a new building, make sure that you have, if you have to have the ceiling reinforced for some conveyor in one place, or if you need to make sure you have a certain clear height. We've even gone in and told what we need the column spacing to be if we know we're putting rack in a certain space of the building and how big, so that the columns fit into and fall into those flue spaces, so you don't lose any pallet locations and you get the optimized space. So earlier the better when you can get in that, because there's a lot of things that you can do that help optimize space and the whole thing.
Yeah.
Anything to add on that, Clayton?
Yeah, I'd just saying to Lori's point, it does depend on what you're looking to do, and it depends on the client, right? So give you a couple examples. Some clients know exactly what they want, right? And they need somebody like us to help build the business case for them, right? Like, I know I want to do this technology. We know we want to go next step in the future. I don't necessarily have the expertise on my team, or maybe they have the expertise, but they don't have the bandwidth. It's there as a supplemental piece, right? And to help drive these things home. Or, we've got plenty of clients that have admittedly tell us that we don't know what we want to do. We went to a trade show and we realized we were out of our depth, right? And so we need help, and that's as corny as that sounds, that's the first step, right? Is admitting you need help. So once you get into that kind of spot, then go and we can evaluate as a team and determine, how deep do we need to go? And, that could range from, a 3 to 6 weeks process to 12-week to several months, right? As, maybe it leads into more of a, like a PMO, like a program management opportunity, where you need somebody to help guide the actual implementation of the project, right? So, or, we even do things like labor standards and that kind of thing. So we can help you on any front, right? If you're looking for, as long as you want to improve and you have areas of opportunity and you're willing and that you need that help, then, a consultant isn't necessarily a 4-letter word like I kind of thought it used to be. So it just kind of depends on what you need, and the team can definitely help.
Well, I'm really glad that we actually had a chance to discuss this, because I never would have thought to have a consultant like yourself come in at the stage, even like you said, Lori, but just even process optimization, just an overview of what they're currently doing. Low-hanging fruit is what you said. I think that's a perfect way of describing it. There might be very quick things that a company can do that they hadn't even thought of, which would increase efficiency or lower costs, all the way up to doing more elaborate systems. So I think it's brilliant. I'll recommend that any company bring on a consultant like you guys. Question came in from Gordon. Thanks for joining in, Gordon. Gordon's got an awesome podcast as well. I'll put the three of you in touch, and perhaps this would be a conversation you could pick up with him as well, because I know he likes talking about a lot of fascinating real estate stuff as well. He asked, is there a particular client profile where you're seeing the most demand for automation?
At least from me, in the last few months and years, it's on the direct to consumer, and where the or even if it is kind of a B2B, but it's where you have a SKU proliferation, right? You've got a lot of SKUs that you're picking, so your units per order and your lines per order or SKUs per order is getting higher. So when you have all that variety within a single order, and you have to pick all that, so that's pretty labor intensive to be picking from all these different areas, and then bring them all back in together into a consolidation type situation, that's where we're seeing, at least I've been seeing the projects I've been working on has the highest demand. Lori, have you kind of seen the same, or you got some others?
No, I'd absolutely agree. And, I think, it's the COVID effect of bringing in COVID, and then everybody was ordering more. And I think that drove a lot of companies who maybe didn't go direct to consumer realized that that was going to be an important part of their business in the future. So, and, like Clayton said, if you've been picking cases or pallets, and then you're going to pick in single units and you're having to combine those all together to go out into order, so much more time, and it takes a lot more time and effort from your employees. So if there's some kind of systems like either the cobots or a goods to picker system where the product comes to the picker, and then they just pick it in, and then they put it in what we call a put wall, which it shows it where to put it, and then you can combine all the orders, all the units from an order that are picked. You put it on one side, and then when it's complete, there's a light on the other side for the packer that says, okay, everything in this little cubby is now ready to be packed. So there are a lot of things like that, and that's exactly the same thing where I've seen. I think that direct to consumer, the e-commerce business, is where we've seen a lot more increase in automation.
Great. Well, thanks for answering that question. And Gordon says thanks as well. So just being cognizant of the time here, and I'm sure we could easily cover another hour just on the various topics we could go through. But is there anything that I missed that you think we should have covered or highlight in the next few minutes? And that can be anything that perhaps I just went over too fast, or something I didn't talk about, or perhaps even trends or something cool that you're seeing in the market that either excites you or scares you. I know I'm scared about Skynet, probably even more so now. You add in the AI, and that's just starting to get a little scary. But anything that I missed that you guys want to end on?
I mean, one thing kind of to your point there, don't get caught up in buzzwords. Don't think AI is solving every problem out there, right? Like it's, we're definitely going in that direction, right? But Chat GPT can't pick a case or a unit quite yet, So I don't let the buzzword or any hype get you going in the wrong direction. But also don't be afraid of exploring those technologies, right? So exactly to Lori's point, with something like a cobot, right? It's right? It's a cooperation. It's working together and making those things better for your operations. So don't be scared of technology, but don't necessarily get caught up in the buzzword either. Happy medium is always a good place to start, and then go from there. Be willing to be open to different things. So that would be my, if there was a takeaway, be willing to learn and focus on new things, but don't get too caught up in, I need the coolest thing out there. That's what, folks like Lori and myself are there to help you with, is to help guide you along the way.
Well said.
Yeah. And I'll add to that. I think, Clayton, something that you mentioned earlier, and I kind of wanted to touch in, is, you pick out the technology and you're ready to go, you're excited, and then you get to the implementation point. So making sure that you have a really strong team in place to help you through that implementation. What is that going to look like? We talked about, you have employees that have always done things this one way. Making some SOPs, which are, so standard operating procedures. Get everybody understand, make sure that you have a plan to implement this. How are you going to implement this? How long is it going to take? What's it going to look like? What type of products are we going to have? Training your employees, making sure you have all that so that you're really ready to go, and getting, you get excited, you get it all done, you get the money, you order it, and then making sure you work with the company, your integrator, whoever else is there. And if you need extra support to help you guide that project and manage that project, get those people in there to do that. Maybe some people with some experience if you don't have them on your team, if it's new to your team, unless you hire somebody in. But, making sure you have that right implementation team to kind of see it through. And so that you're not just, you get excited, get it in there, and then you're kind of left. I think that's really important, that follow through, so that you have a good experience and you get out of the technology what you were looking for.
Absolutely.
It's also very well said. You guys are very well spoken and offered a ton of insight into this. So you've got a fan in me. I will be sure to send more people your way to get started in this process, either at the beginning or just as a process optimization consulting. So I'll put links to your LinkedIn in the description as well, and website to Hy-Tek. Any other, is that the best way to get a hold of you, or is there any other way that I should direct people your way?
No, that sounds about right. Through the Hy-Tek website is usually the best way to go.
Okay. And I do have both your LinkedIn's
Yep.
there as well. One just quick comment from Stephen, very informative. Thank you. Thanks for tuning in, Stephen. And thanks to both of you for sharing so much great insight on that. I loved the few times that we've chatted before this, and then this was a great conversation as well. So I really do thank you for taking the time to do this. And to people tuned in, whether you were live or whether you're watching this after, greatly appreciate thumbs up or thumbs down. I'm probably the only channel that actually asks people to give me a thumbs down. I like feedback, so I'd rather hear what people are saying. So and comments are always great as well, and I encourage you to reach out to Lori and Clayton. Their links will be in the description, and we'll probably put that in the comment as well. But thanks to everybody to tune in. We're right on the hour, so that was perfect timing to wrap up. But again, Lori, Clayton, thank you very much for your time and insights.
Awesome, Chad.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
Thanks, Chad.
Take care.
All right, bye-bye.